This is Join Us in France, episode 14. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Yes.
On today's show, she'll tell us about visiting Versailles for a day, give us an overview of what we'll see there, some historical background, some pitfalls we should avoid. Those are always good to know about. And some really good stories about the glory days of Versailles. Now, those are fun, I think.
Oh, they're very much fun.
Now, don't worry if you can't take notes. You'll find our show notes on joinusinfrance.com, followed by the number 14. Now, we're recording this episode on Easter weekend of 2014. We've released the episode with our appeal for more iTunes review just 2 days ago. And we're very lucky that we already have 2 listeners that went ahead and wrote a review for us on iTunes.
That's very nice.
Yes. And so we want to say thank you, John Lopez. He says, Vive la France. Nice. Merci beaucoup pour le podcast. He says he'll be coming back to France next October and that he gets more inspired after each podcast he listens to. And we're very glad to hear that. Thank you, John Lopez. And also thank you to Ozzy in Canada who says, I'm really enjoying this podcast as it really gives a good idea to both the sites to visit in France as well as the little aspects of everyday life in France. I really recommend this podcast to anyone who is thinking of visiting or moving to France.
Thank you, Ozzy.
Thank you, Ozzy. That's exactly what we're trying to do with this podcast. So I'm really excited that we now appear in iTunes New and Noteworthy, but only for the places and travel category, which is, the ones that we care about, really.
Right.
And it's wonderful to be there. iTunes looks to the number of subscribers and the number of reviews, so we're going in the right direction. It's wonderful. Don't forget, if you have a moment, please write us a review on iTunes or in Stitcher Radio. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Now we'll get to the music. And then we'll start talking about Versailles. How about that?
Yippee. Hi, Annie.
Hi, Elise. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm so excited that today we're going to talk about Versailles. So
Yes.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
What is the thing you think of or that you visualize when you hear the word Versailles?
Oh, the waterworks.
The waterworks.
Yes. I saw it when I was little, and I loved it.
You saw it when you were little?
Yes, I did.
Oh, well, lucky you. Lucky you, especially since for a long time they were not working anymore. And they've just been reinstated. So we'll talk about the waterworks in a little while.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not even what I expected you to say, but that's fun.
Uh-oh.
Okay, no, that's great. No, because I was thinking more of, big dresses with crinolines underneath them and silly hairdos that go up about a meter above your head or something like that.
I don't care about those.
You don't care about that stuff at all, though?
No.
Okay.
Give me something to look at, and I'll look for the technological, impressive thing.
Okay. Okay. Wait, that's true. You and I look at different things when we go someplace. But that's what makes the world go round, right?
That's right.
Okay, so I thought that we would begin by talking a little bit about the background and the history of Versailles, which I think most people know is an enormous chateau, which means palace, basically. And again, the difference between a castle in the sense of what we're talking about when we talk about historical places and a chateau is that a chateau is really another word in this sense for a huge palace. And a castle would be something that is much older and fortified, which in a sense Versailles was not. It never was.
No.
So Versailles is actually a town. It's about 18 kilometers, 20 kilometers west of Paris. And the town itself was built around the chateau. The chateau was the first thing to exist. Mm-hmm. And the town, little by little, became very important and still is because there is a very important school there. There is a very important school of cavalry I'm thinking of a word, but an equestrian school. Sorry,
yes.
An equestrian school that is very much connected to the history of Versailles. But Versailles itself is and was for a very, very long time the center of power of the government run by the kings of France.
Mm-hmm.
And now when people go to see it, they go to see it for the decoration, for the size of the building, for the grounds.
And it is huge.
It is some people say the most visited building in and around Paris, but let's just say it is certainly one of the 2 or 3 most visited things in and around Paris.
It's true. It's always full of tourists.
It's always full of tourists. And we're going to talk about that as one of the pitfalls and one of the things to watch out for when you go.
Yeah.
So let's just begin with a little bit of background information. Versailles was, in fact, originally a small hunting lodge in the middle of enormous amounts of forest. It's a very beautiful area west of Paris that is still very low, rolling hills, very green. And it was a hugely dense forest area that was used by the royal family and by the kings to go hunting.
Okay.
And for centuries, hunting was considered to be a sport of the kings and the entourage of the kings. You know, if you were a poor person, you were certainly not allowed to go hunting on the royal grounds. You could be killed for poaching. You know, I mean, it was a very, very serious kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there was a king named Louis XIII. We're in the period of the Louis now, okay?
Yeah.
We're going to stay with the Louis. This is it's like what I like to think. There's got to be a rock song somewhere, Louis, 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 you know, has to do with the kings of France. But so Louis XIII went to this place called the Versailles as a hunting lodge and loved it and decided that it would make a wonderful small chateau as a place, basically, what we would consider now to be a country home outside of Paris. And this is in the early 1600s, early and middle 1600s. And of course, the main place where he lived was at the Louvre in the center of Paris. But he also had other palaces because the kings moved around, though they went to a lot of different places. And part of that was very interesting. It's a kind of evolutionary instinct. As a king, you didn't want to stay in one place very long because your enemies could attack you there.
Oh.
So, and this goes back to old feudal times. And the king and the king's court literally packed up everything and would move. And they would have quite a few different places to go to, which meant that they never had very much permanent furniture, which is another whole story we should talk about one day. But anyway, so Louis XIII decided that it was time to build something a little bit more extensive and a little bit more elaborate than this hunting lodge. Mm-hmm. And he hired some of the best architects and engineers of the time. And they cleared away some of the forest to make what was the first section of the Chateau of Versailles as it stands today. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have great ambitions for it. He just wanted something that was beautiful to look at, not very big, but that was a nice place for him and for part of the court to stay outside of Paris. Okay. I think he was kind of tired of all the shenanigans that were going on in Paris at the time. There was a lot of plotting and all kinds of stuff like that.
Well, it's a very French thing to do. You know, you have a permanent residence and then you have some other place where you like to go.
That's true. It is a very French thing to do, even people who are not very rich. Exactly.
Even to this day,
Right. So in 1631, he actually began the building of the Chateau of Versailles, and it was made in the style of the time, which was the modern style of the time, interestingly enough, which was a combination of stone and brick and very steep slate roofing, very typical of some other buildings that you can see in some parts of Paris. But it was the style of the time, and he wanted to be very fashionable. And he spent a good deal of time out there, but his permanent residence was still in Paris. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't Louis XIII, it was his son, Louis XIV, who became king when Louis XIII died. Louis XIII died he was not that young. And of course, in those days, if you lived to be 55 or even something like 50, you were not considered to be very young. But it happened that he had his two sons very late in life.
Okay.
So Louis the 14th was only a small child when he died, and he was under the control of his mother. And she kept him in the palace in the Louvre in Paris. And when he became king officially, which was in 1661, and by the way, you become king at the age of 14. That's when you're considered adult at that time.
Wow. 14, huh?
14, huh?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I don't
no.
know too many people who want to be ruled over by a 14-year-old.
Yeah. Well, 14-year-olds, of course, at that time didn't go to junior high school and weren't all walking hormones, you know. I mean,
I'm sure they were walking hormones.
Well,
all the same.
in a way they were, but of course they were raised from the age of 3 to know that they were going to be king, and they were raised with a certain protocol, and
Right.
it was quite different. But obviously, at the age of 14, you still have to have advisors. I mean, you don't do everything on your
Yeah.
own. But what happened was, this is connected to the story of why Versailles became what it was. Louis XIV grew up with a very, very manipulative mother who was Maria de Medici, and her advisors.
So was she a regent or something?
She was his regent, yes.
Okay.
And she was originally from Italy anyway. And when Louis XIII died, she took over the reins of power, and she and her advisors were very, very controlling. And Louis XIV very quickly decided that he did not want to spend his entire life being suffocated by this kind of control. In fact, at some point, he actually asked his mother to go away, which is a polite way of saying, go to a chateau where I can't see you. I don't want to have you around anymore. And he made a decision that really, of course, changed the future of France forever and ever. He said that he was going to stop being a king that moved around from castle to castle, and that he was going to decide where he was living, and that from that point on, everybody was going to come to see him. And he dismissed the advisors. He stopped having an official prime minister or major advisor, and he said he was going to make all the decisions. He was going to be the one to run everything. And in order to do that, he wanted a place where other people could come and live, and there would be space for them. So this is what he did. He went to Versailles, which he knew as a place to go, I would assume, for short periods of time, because he had been taken there all his life. And he said, there's so much land around here. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this place my official residence. This is going to be the home of the kings of France from now on. And we're going to make this so big that whoever wants to be part of the court can come and live here. And people will come here. I'm not going anywhere from this point on.
Wow.
And so what he did was he hired the very best of the architects and landscape designers and painters of the time. And he proceeded to take enormous amounts of money and built this absolutely phenomenal chateau.
Yeah, it must have taken a huge amount of money. I mean, it oozes money, that place. It
Of course, it oozes money. It oozes everything, because he not only used money that he took from taxes that he accumulated from every part of France, but it became what really was considered to be a kind of bleeding of the people of France to finish the building of Versailles. Now, it is true that at any given time, once the building pretty much was established, because there are some other buildings on the exterior that are at the other end of the park, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the main chateau itself. When it was finished, it housed probably 3,000 or 4,000 people.
Oh, that's a lot. Yeah,
this is a lot of people.
Yeah.
It housed all of these people, because not only did the king have a huge entourage, he had counts and princes and all kinds of people who came, but anybody who wished a favor of the king could come to the court. Now, obviously, if you were a poor pauper, if you were a baker, You might not have the statute to be able to go to the court, but theoretically, the doors were open. There were certain hours every single day when people lined up down the huge galleries that make up the chateau. And little by little, he received every single person.
Yeah, that seems contradictory because I mean, the way you describe him, it sounds like a control freak. But at the same time, he wanted to hear from his vassals, I guess.
Well, it wasn't even vassals anymore. This is really, we could say, post-feudal times.
Okay.
There's a vestige of feudalism in the fact that, you have nobility all over France, and there's a hierarchy in the nobility.
Yes,
you have ranking like you do in the military.
Yes.
But in fact, it was more that by centralizing the power and having people come to him, he had absolute control over everything that happened. And the person that was the most important was not a prime minister who gave him political advice. It was his finance minister. His finance minister, who was a man named Colbert.
Oh, yes.
Colbert. And Mr. Colbert, who in fact wasn't even from a noble family, but was a very astute, intelligent man. He was the one that Louis XIV talked to about, do we buy this? Do we spend this money? But basically, Louis XIV decided everything, absolutely everything himself. So little by little, he hired some of the most famous architects. He hired a man whose name is Le Nôtre. Le Nôtre
I've heard of him too.
The most important, and really historically, probably in France, the most important forever and ever landscape gardener. He's the one who created all the designs for the park that surrounds the castle. It surrounds the chateau.
Yeah.
And he hired, one of the architects he hired was a man named Mansart. And I think I mentioned to you the other day that, in French, and I don't know if in English, do we talk about windows that are up in what looks like the attic, where you have a very steep roof and you have a window jutting out. And we call it in French a window that's a mansard window.
Yeah, mansard. It's dormer window.
It's a dormer window.
Yeah.
Well, it was created for the chateau.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's very characteristic of
very
that
characteristic.
style.
And that became, of course, afterwards, because it was the king style, other people copied it. So you have lots of other buildings, especially in Paris itself, that, of course, copied these styles afterwards. So what happened was that little by little, Louis XIV reigned for a very long time.
Did he?
Very, very long time. If I should have the date in front of me, but I don't. But if I'm not mistaken, he reigned for over 50 years.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna look it up.
He really reigned for an enormously long time. I mean, he reigned so long that Louis XV was not his son and was not his grandson. Louis XV was his great-grandson.
Oh, yeah, that's a long time.
Louis XIV actually outlived his son and his grandson.
Wow.
And so it was amazing. So he had an enormous influence, not only on the country in terms of its politics and in terms of the economy, but he had a huge influence on the arts. And of course, this is one of the reasons that Versailles has stayed so important. He had Molière come and perform for him in the chateau. He had the most important
artists. I wish I could have seen that.
Oh, well, so do I, actually.
But yeah, Molière in the chateau. That would have been amazing.
Not only that, but did you know that Louis XIV was an incredibly good dancer?
Yes, I have heard that.
Yes, he was tall. In the end of his life, he was not very good looking anymore because, like most people in France at that time, he did not take care of his teeth. So he apparently tried not to smile at the end of his life because it was not very pretty to look at. However, he was very tall. He had a great allure. He was apparently a wonderful dancer, and the choreography was sometimes designed so that he could be the star of the performances.
Yes. At school, my daughter said that one of the history sections they did was on Louis XIV, and the teacher made them dance and made them dress up and dance in the fashion of Louis XIV. Yes.
I would love to be able to do that.
He reigned for 77 years.
Well, that's how long he lived.
No, he reigned from 1638 until his death in 1715. So that's 77 years. Because he started really young.
He started very young. Well, that includes when he was a baby, though, when he was under the regents of his mother.
Probably.
Yes. I mean, he had the longest reign in the history of France.
Yes, that's
he
a
and
long
Queen
time.
Victoria, I think, are the two that are the record setters in terms of the amount of time that they have reigned over a country.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had composers. He had people like Molière come with theater. He had painters, a man named Lebrun, who was a very famous 17th century painter in France.
Mm-hmm.
He had all of the most important artists, designers, architects, landscape architects. He had engineers come and create the system of fountains and canalization that went in to create these beautiful lakes in the park. All of this was the incredible flourishing of the arts under Louis XIV.
Yeah.
Now, just a few statistics, just to give people an idea of the size of this chateau.
Yep.
It has 700 rooms.
Whoa.
Don't worry about it. If you go, you're not going to see more than about 25.
Thank goodness.
And believe me, by the time you get through the 25, you will have had a good idea of what the rest of this chateau looks like.
Yeah.
There are 67 sets of stairs.
Wow.
Over 2,000 windows.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in the main chateau. This is not the auxiliary buildings that are at the other end of the park. The park. Okay, so the chateau was the building. But Louis XIV wanted to create some place that would be so magical. And really, this was the idea, that it would be something like a magnet that would make people want to come there, and that it would show the power of the French king, who at the time was extremely important in Europe anyway, the riches of the French king, and his good taste. This was the other thing. Louis XIV was a king who wanted people to know how much he was a patron of the arts. And so he asked these designers to make a park. Now, when I say park, we're talking 800 hectare.
Yeah, it's
800
very
hectare
large.
is, you just have to multiply times 2.2 to see how many acres that is. We're talking 2,000 acres.
Wow.
2,000 acres of grounds, 20 kilometers or what is that, 12, 13 miles of roads inside the park, over 200,000 trees and bushes.
Yeah.
And they are replanted and taken care of all the time.
So did they change the structure of the park very much, or did it mostly stay the same and they just keep it going?
No, the actual structure that you can go to see now in terms of the park is the original structure. It went through a period of time when it was left in abandon a little bit, or it wasn't that well taken care of. But basically, in the last 50, 60 years, starting in the middle of the 20th century, after World War II, an enormous amount of money was invested in reestablishing the park the way it was originally designed. Part of that money, by the way, is American money. The Americans, Jackie Kennedy, and a lot of Americans were very, very important in raising huge amounts of money, the Rockefellers as well, to put back things into the park and into the chateau.
Yeah.
The park was never destroyed. The chateau was never destroyed, but it was left in a relatively bad condition, and a lot of the furnishings were taken out first after the French Revolution, and then little by little things got a bit dissipated, so that it was not in the greatest condition. But during the time of Louis XIV, it became famous all over Europe. People would come from other countries just to come and see what this fabulous place looked like. And of course, Louis XIV, who was a great fan of mythology and who, as I said, was a great dancer, he became known as the Sun King.
Right.
And the Sun King, he had all of the major windows of these fabulous rooms, especially this incredible space called the Gallery of Mirrors.
Yes.
It faces south. And the idea was it faces south towards the gardens and to the park beyond. There's a huge orangery where he grew exotic fruits and things. That's called the orangery, right next to it. And then beyond, you have this fabulous symmetrical park with this, like in the Renaissance, you have a vanishing point as far away as the eye can see.
Yeah.
There are little corners in the park where you have sculpture everywhere. There are fountains everywhere. You can
it's
get
truly
lost.
stunning.
It's absolutely stunning.
Yeah. On a beautiful day, I think, it would be so lovely to spend the whole day just walking around the grounds.
Oh, you can do anything. Now, inside the chateau, what happened, strangely enough, is, of course, after he died, his great-grandson was Louis XV. He lived there. And then his grandson, Louis XVI, who, unfortunately for him, was the king who was assassinated, who was guillotined during the French Revolution, he and Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
And during the reigns of Louis XV and XVI, which were not as well, Louis XVI was certainly not as long at all, but they added other buildings. They added small buildings that were at the other end of the park. Some of them were added by Louis XV, who wanted to get away from the immensity of the chateau, and he wanted a place that he and his wife, and then eventually his mistress, would be able to go and just be alone a little bit. It was a very strange thing, because up until the end of the 18th century, the end of the 1700s, there was very little idea of privacy for kings and queens. Everything was done in public.
Yeah.
And when I say everything, I really mean everything. Really,
Yes. I heard stories at school where they would tell us that people came and witnessed the king getting up and the king getting dressed.
And the king peeing.
Peeing?
Yeah. I mean, this is
Why
stuff that
on
was
earth
done
would you
in
want to see
public.
that?
Well, that's another whole story. We have to talk about the difference between the customs in the old days and the customs now, and things like that. But it's very interesting that some of these buildings that were built at the other end of the park were built really to get away from this, you see. And then Louis XVI, who was married to Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette was the youngest child of the Empress of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yep.
And she was brought up in an atmosphere, obviously, she was spoiled. She was a daughter of an empress.
Yeah.
But she was not used to this kind of public life. And she was basically very unhappy, whatever else you want to think of her and her politics. And she asked her husband to have two little buildings built. One was just a little bit of a house so that she could get away with her closest friends who were countesses.
Is that the Petit Trianon?
That's the Petit Trianon.
Yes, that one's lovely.
The other
so
thing
cute.
is she built a farmhouse, and she had animals brought in, and she would go out and she would pretend to be a shepherdess.
Oh, how cute.
This was how she kept herself from being bored to tears in the protocol of the Chateau of Versailles.
But I bet to the people it probably came across as another extravagant, crazy idea that the kings had.
Well, it was, interestingly enough, the kings were always extravagant. And of course, we're talking about what made this fabulous. But starting with Louis XIV, there were problems all over the country because all the money was siphoned off from everywhere to build Versailles, to keep Versailles up, to make sure that people were coming to Versailles. And
I mean, even to this day, I cannot fathom. Imagine the French president or the American president, for that matter, deciding, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to build myself a fabulous place, something the likes of which you have never seen and might never see again." It would really come across today as just outrageous, and probably it did at the time too.
Well, it did. It did at the time, and of course, there were certain regions of the country that were overtaxed, and this is, of course, the beginning of the rumbling that eventually led up to the French Revolution.
Yeah.
Really started with this. So, in some ironic way, Louis XIV, who became the king that represented absolute power, what they call the absolute monarch.
Yeah.
He also really set the stage for what eventually became the French Revolution, which, of course, we all know was really inspired by the American War of Independence. But that's another whole story.
Yeah.
It really is.
But yes, I do know that.
But what's interesting about Marie Antoinette, and I'm not defending her on some level, but it's interesting to know that she in fact, was considered to be a foreigner. She was never accepted at the court. She came to Versailles at the age of 14 to marry Louis XVI, and nobody ever liked her from the beginning. And she really had a very hard time. So when she built these other buildings, since she never thought twice, I am sure, about whether it cost money or not, that was not part of the things that would go on in her head to begin with. You know, it was mostly just to get away from this incredibly stifling world and this incredible protocol. But of course, that was the way kings and queens lived, with this kind of luxury all the time. Then, of course, we get to 1792, and the royal family is put in prison. The revolution had started in 1789. But like with all revolutions, there were two different factions, and one faction basically simply wanted to make it into what would be considered today to be a constitutional monarchy, like pretty much what exists in England. And then there was the faction that was far more extreme, that really wanted to eliminate not just the idea of monarchy, but all the people that were, in fact, part of the royal family.
Yes, off with their heads, kind of thing.
Off with their heads. Yeah. And that is really, of course, what eventually did happen in 1794. First, Louis XVI and then his wife were both guillotined. So the building was ransacked. There were two, the Louvre and Versailles were considered to be the representations of all of the abuse of the monarchy, of the royal families. They didn't destroy the buildings, but in terms of the Versailles, what they did was they took all the furniture out. And of course, there were squatters.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in the Louvre, there were squatters, too. And the park, you know, people came and lived in the park. Well, the park is so big that, of course, it was very easy to move in and sit and, you know, make a little space to sleep in the park and everything. But it was saved by Napoleon. See, Napoleon, that's another whole story, of course. But, you know, Napoleon was first a lieutenant during the revolution, who was a revolutionary. And then when he saw the turn the revolution was taking, he stepped in and actually created a coup d'etat, ended the revolution, and took back Versailles. And he moved into Versailles. And
he did? Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. He actually, there are several rooms. In fact, I think the rooms are in the big Trianon, one of the two small, you know, chateaus, mini chateaus that are in the other end of the park, that became his official residence.
Oh, wow. That had escaped me.
He really wanted, well, you have to remember that he also wanted to be considered to be in the lineage of the monarchs.
Oh, yeah. He was definitely, in his head, he was a king. Yes.
He was a king.
Yeah.
So, but interestingly enough, he was more modest in terms of, he used the main Chateau of Versailles, but basically he slept in the smaller one at the other end.
See.
And of course, that really did save the Chateau. Now, of course, Napoleon came, Napoleon went. There was a restoration of the monarchy, and then Napoleon came back, and then there was another restoration of the monarchy. And the last king basically was in the middle of the 19th century. But the last king to use Versailles was really pretty much about the 1830s. And from that point on, it started to be considered as a museum, but it was a museum that needed to be refurnished. And it was very difficult because the furniture had all either been destroyed or stolen.
Yeah.
So
it's probably all over France today.
Well, some of it is in France, some of it is in the United States, and a lot of it was actually destroyed. So the furnishings that you see when you go to the chateau now, interestingly enough, are either exquisite, accurate copies made by fine furniture makers based on the designs and the drawings that people knew existed, or they are pieces that have been hunted down and usually paid a lot of money to get back, to bring them back into the chateau. But a fair amount is, in fact, reproduction.
Now, what I do remember from the chateau from when I was a kid, because I've been there just twice. One, I was a young kid. I don't remember how old I was. And the second time, just when my husband and I were dating. So it's been...
that was already a long time
25 years ago or something? Gosh. 26 years ago? Yeah, we've been married a long time. And I I had the impression that it was empty, that it was over the top gold and decorative but empty.
You mean the gold and all of that, meaning the walls and the ceilings?
Yes. The wood, all the beautiful moldings and whatever that they had everywhere. I mean, it was over the top.
Well, it is over the top.
Yeah,
it is over the top, but it is not empty anymore.
Oh, that's good to know.
Okay, so this is the thing. It's really in the last 35 years, there has been an enormous amount of money invested in bringing back Versailles to what it was before. To this day, and I'm saying to this day, literally to this day, when you go in to visit the chateau, you will find people working on the restoration of a wall, of a piece of ceiling, on a piece of furniture while you walk through the chateau.
So they're still working on it all the time.
All the time. And in fact, the last time I was there, which was just a couple of months ago, 2-3 months ago, I actually stopped and asked two people who were working on the walls in one of the rooms. And I asked them how they can work like that, because you have masses and masses of people, and we'll talk about that in a minute, going through the chateau at any given time. And they said that they have no choice, that the work has to be done, and that every single room it has work that needs to be done. And so they're constantly working on something. If they're not working on replacing some of the floorboards and the original beautiful wood, they're working on replacing some of the plaster decoration on the walls, or the textiles that are on the walls, or the painting. So what has happened is that Versailles, of course, is now victim of its own success. That means that there are so many people that go through all the time that it is packed almost all the time. And these people who are the people who do the restoration work, they literally work almost 24/7 because there is no other way for them to get things done. And they have to deal with the crowds, they have to deal with the noise. And of course, it's reciprocal, because of course it blocks up some of the places.
Yes.
And it makes it even harder sometimes to manipulate your way through the chateau itself.
Yeah. Well, that's a blessing and a curse that we have in Europe, is we have so many old buildings, old churches, old everything, and all these things have to be kept up.
They have to be kept up.
And you know, you mentioned the Rockefellers and the Kennedys earlier.
Jackie Kennedy, particularly.
Yeah. That they were very generous, and thank goodness, because we just have so many monuments to maintain. France is a pretty rich country, but not rich enough to keep all of that up.
No, you cannot.
You cannot. It's just, it would take crews of, a couple million people to do it all.
That's right. And it really would.
We don't have that many trained people to do this, and it just takes time.
And the people who have the right to work on a historical monument, whether it's a church or a palace, they are called the compagnons.
Yeah.
A compagnon is the modern equivalent of someone who was a member of a guild during the Middle Ages. They must train for 10 years.
Right.
And they must go from historical monument to historical monument. Now, this could be someone who does the roofing, someone who does carpentry, someone who does stone cutting, someone who does painting. It does not matter. These are the only people allowed to work on these buildings, and they cost a fortune.
Yeah, of course.
They're
highly trained.
They're highly trained. For someone who has a passion for a job that involves one of these things, it's one of the most wonderful things you can do.
Yeah.
So
I know a couple, and I'm not very, into the art scene, but I know a couple of people who are official restorers of monuments and art, and I know they're super smart. They have PhDs, and they're also very, very good with their hands.
It's very special. So of course it costs a fortune.
Yeah.
So, but let's just an overall idea of it. You have the chateau with all of these 700 rooms. Remember that you don't see that many of them. The entire chateau, not the grounds, just the chateau, is 67,000 square meters.
Oh, wow.
That is beyond anybody's comprehension. It's kind of like talking about going to the next galaxy, okay? There are only about 15,000 of those square meters that are ever open to the public, and in the general visit, which is the first visit that most people do, you don't even see the 15,000 square meters.
Yeah.
So you just, it's beyond really imagining in terms of its size.
Well, but I mean, it's probably more of the same. Once you've seen some, they probably select the ones that are most representative of what's going on, and then...
Well, this is what they have done. And this is, of course, one of these things where Versailles is basically an ongoing project. So just to mention that I have been back to see it a lot in the last several years. And every single time there has been a change because they're in the process of doing some remodeling on the entranceway, on where you go in, where you go out, on various things like that. So basically, when you go to visit the chateau, as opposed to visiting the chateau in the park, but just the building itself, the main building, you get to see the several of the rooms where the king and the queen slept. You get to see some of the reception rooms. You see the gallery with the mirrors that has been restored. It's absolutely magnificent to see. And you get to see some other rooms. That is really the sum total of what you see in terms of the intimate rooms where you see the original furnishing, the textiles on the walls and things like that.
Do you get to see kitchens and things like that?
Not at all. No, not at all.
A lot of chateaux in France you do.
Yes, but those are usually, first of all, those are obviously much smaller ones. And they're very often feudal castles as opposed to chateau. In this case, what people are guided through to see are the rooms that basically were the rooms of reception life for the monarch. And so what you see, and then of course you have to walk through some sections that are these enormous galleries where you have a series of sculptures, because you have to go from one wing of the chateau to the other, because they keep changing some of the rooms that are open. There are certain rooms that are always open. You have the king's private chapel that is available to see almost immediately when you go inside. And you can see it from downstairs, and then you can see it again from upstairs.
Okay.
You can see, as I said, the Gallery of Mirrors, which is one of the most famous pieces in the entire chateau. And you see the king's room and the queen's room and various other rooms. The thing is that the design of architecture in a building like that was such that you have on one side, basically, of the building, a very long, what we would consider to be a hallway that opens. The rooms are linear, so you go from one to the other.
Yeah, it's called an enfilade.
An enfilade.
Right, and, so they're all like...
it's just a string.
Together. Yeah.
Exactly. So, of course, what that is that when you get in, and you go in, and by the way, one of the things that I think is really good, I mean, there are some problems with visiting Versailles that have to do with various elements that had to do with the overcrowdedness and things like that. But now the ticket includes a free audio guide, and it is absolutely essential. If you're going to appreciate visiting the Chateau of Versailles, you must take the audio guide, because it gives you a very good, complete explanation of the history, a basic history. It gives you, in the first 2 or 3 rooms, you see the history of the building of the chateau, and you see there are some, it's kind of like 2 PowerPoint presentations that you get to see that are flashed on a wall. They're trying to make it a little bit more modern so that you get an idea of what you're going through before you do. Then you go upstairs. And then, and downstairs you can see the King's Chapel, which he went to. He had mass in the chapel every day at 10 o'clock, every morning at 10. And then you go up these fabulous stone stairs, one of the staircases.
Yeah.
And you go through this series of decorated, furnished rooms. And that is the general basic visit.
Okay.
Then you can take the audio guide, and if you pay some extra money, you can do a second visit to a little bit of another section. And then you can even do a separate visit that you have to pay even more money for if you want to do it with one of the local guides in the chateau. But you don't really need to if you do the audio guide. Now,
obviously, the audio guide is in English as well as French and many other languages.
It's in every language in the universe, I think, at this point. You know, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is you speak, and obviously the most predominant language is English. And the second, of course, is, or used to be Japanese, and now is probably Chinese. But then that's the visit to the chateau.
Yeah.
There are 2 or 3 little shops. They're also changing that around, because there are a couple of little small stops that are along the way where you can buy souvenirs or some books about Versailles or little things, nice little things actually, but little things that you can take as souvenirs. And they're in the process of recreating a cafe downstairs. Right now, inside the chateau, there is only one cafe, and that is an Angelina cafe, which means you spend a fortune for a tiny little espresso. You spend about $5 for a tiny little espresso and a macaroon or a sandwich it's extremely expensive and not very big. But if you want to, why not? That's also one of the 2 places in the chateau where there are toilets. And that's one of the problems with the chateau is that when you start going through, you can't make a U-E and go back the other way. So before you go in, now they've put some toilets downstairs below street level, which means you can have access to them before you begin your visit to the chateau.
Is it wheelchair accessible by any chance?
I don't remember. Probably it will be. It will be because they're bringing it up to norms. But since I remember going down the steps with some of the people last time, but I didn't pay attention. But if it wasn't, it will be by the time any of the people listening to us get there, because they were in the process of fixing all of that up very soon. And then there's this other set inside upstairs at the Angelina Cafe. But basically what happens is it's impossible to turn around and go back. So that's why the audio guide is good, because you have to understand that you will be there with a lot of other people. And if you want to have the time to really look and listen to the audio guide, you're just going to have to let all these people basically push you or push around you and move out, because it really is like that. This is really a place that thousands of people go every day. And obviously there's a high season, which is the summertime. And I was just there in the winter, and really there were a lot of people, but it was nothing compared to what it's like in the summertime. In the summertime, talking about visiting Versailles, at 9 o'clock in the morning, there are already about 50 tour buses lined up in the huge parking lot in front of it.
Dang.
And the line is enormous. Buy your ticket ahead of time.
Okay.
Buy your ticket ahead of time, or online, or if you are going to spend a minimum of 2 or 3 days visiting museums in Paris, buy a museum pass.
Which includes Versailles.
Which includes Versailles. Okay, because theoretically, and I say theoretically because I'll explain why in a second, but theoretically there are 2 lines. One line for those people who already have tickets, which is true in all the major museums. It's true in the Louvre, it's true in Orsay.
Just because you have a ticket, you still have to line up.
But the line, if you already have a ticket, is shorter and goes faster.
Of course.
It can happen, and I know this by personal experience, that even when you have the museum passes, and even when everybody has the ticket that means they can already get in, that the museum is so crowded, and this of course is in the height of the high season, that the museum, the people who run it, decide to make one enormous line, which is not fair to those people who have spent the money to buy a museum pass or prepay for a ticket. And in that case, it doesn't matter, and you still have to stand online. So you have to know that if you go in the height of the season, you have to get there as early as you can. You have to buy your ticket ahead of time or have a museum pass, or
okay, I'm listening.
Wait till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Because everything stops for lunch in France.
Of course.
And most people assume that they're going to get there ahead of everybody else. So everybody shows up early in the morning. And what happens is that if you don't get inside the chateau by 10 o'clock, basically, if you're claustrophobic, you do not want to go in. You just do not. You will have to.
People.
Oh, it's really, really.
Is it like Sistine Chapel kind of?
Yeah.
Just like
it's exactly like
pushed
that.
up against.
It could be like the Japanese pushers on the metro in Tokyo.
I don't like that.
I don't like it either very much. So, but what happens is when you walk out, you'll notice that all of a sudden at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that there's hardly any line at all because
People get hungry.
people get hungry.
French people, anyway, will leave. They'll go have their lunch.
French people will leave. But the other people, guess where they're going to go? You go into the park because, now this is what I want to say. Obviously, having been to Versailles now, I would say about 22 times. I'm
22,
not sure.
but who's counting?
Who's counting, right? I'm just, it seems like a nice number. I was going to say 20-something times, but the more I go, the more I appreciate the park. And the park is splendid. It is so beautiful. It is so wonderful. It is so big. You cannot really appreciate the park in the dead of winter because the Versailles is chillier than Paris. There's a bit of a wind there. It's humid. It's cold.
It's
you have to
wet,
really
yeah.
be dressed for winter. However, if you go in the spring, if you go in the autumn, if you go in the summertime, you can spend 2 hours in the chateau. I can't imagine really spending more than that, to be honest. And you can spend the rest of the day in the park. There are snack places where you can get a sandwich, a crepe, an ice cream cone, a coffee, anything like that. There are 2 restaurants, nice restaurants. There are 2 other small restaurants kind of hidden away in the woods. There, you can bring a picnic into the park.
That's good.
You can rent a bicycle. You can rent a tandem bicycle.
Aww.
You can rent a golf cart that seats 4, an electric cart. You can pay to take the little choo-choo train that goes all the way around the park and get on and off wherever you want.
Yep.
You can row. You can rent a boat and row on one of the 2 magnificent lakes that are set up.
Oh, that's fun.
They're geometric, but they are actually lakes. You can go to heaven in this park. And the fountains have all been or are in the process of being restored. The last time they were fixing up the magnificent fountain that's just below the steps leading outside of the chateau.
Yes.
Which is absolutely exquisite. And in fact, it's got copper tubing underneath that apparently at the time it was made was the latest invention. It was just incredible, the kind of the system that they created. All of this is because the park is becoming more and more popular, and it is really a fabulous thing to see.
So is it a separate ticket for the park and the chateau?
If you want to go only to the park, you do not have to pay.
Oh.
You can go in the side entrance that takes you directly into the park, except for the days that they have the waterworks shows.
Oh, of course, yes.
Now, in the summer, now that they have restored most of the waterworks, there are, from the end of March till the end of October, there are certain days, you have to find out, there are different schedules, when there are waterworks, what they call the grands eaux. They have fountain shows, and they are during the day.
And these are really nice.
And they're beautiful. Yeah. However, this is what I want to go back for, because this is what I have not done. In July and August, for 22 euros, you can go to the nighttime show, which means you will get to see the fire and waterworks the way Louis XIV did, with the Baroque music composed by people like Lully, and the whole performance that takes you back to the days of Louis XIV.
Oh, that would be really good.
And this is just a fabulous thing to do. It's really beautiful.
It's probably not as crowded at night because there's an extra cost.
It's not as crowded. Otherwise, the park is free during the day. And of course, you don't even have to rent a vehicle if you just want to walk around.
If you want to.
I have a friend, he and his wife and their child, they take their bikes. They go out by train. They bring a picnic. They take their bikes and they spend the day in Versailles Park.
Yeah.
And it's really fabulous.
Yeah.
It's really a spectacular thing to do. I think that most people don't realize what Versailles is until they go. But of course, I think it's also true that unless you hear about the history of Versailles, it's just, as you said, it's just another one of these over-the-top, extravagant, not necessarily modern taste buildings, you know?
Yeah, but I think it's worth seeing because it shows, I mean, especially if you put it in the context of the time where people were not that wealthy, average people. People lived in very crowded, small homes that were not heated, no lights. It was pretty miserable.
It was pretty miserable for a lot of people, that's right.
And then you show up at a place like Versailles, and it's just stunning how beautiful and all over the top it is.
It is. I mean, it is stunning. I think that in terms of the designs and everything, it's absolutely magnificent. But it is true. I had, one of my clients, one of my last visits there, it was the first time that someone expressed a certain amount of disgust. It's a bit of a strong word, but she was kind of, it was like, they took all this money to build this when people were dying,
honestly, I think it is
really
shocking.
Is hard.
Yeah, it is shocking what they did, but they got away with it. All the kings, all over Europe.
All the kings all over Europe did, but the Louis XIV and the Versailles it certainly is the ultimate example.
Yeah, he got away with it more than he got away with
it more, and of course, by the way, it was in Versailles, of course, that the final treaties were signed for World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And
le traité de Versailles.
Eisenhower signed it there.
Yeah.
So it's a place, de Gaulle, of course, made it a very important place symbolically after World War II was over. Mm-hmm. It's a place that still has a huge symbolic significance for French people, even those who couldn't care less about the king.
Yeah.
And just one last thing.
Yeah.
How to get there?
Yeah, we need to talk about
how to get there.
Yeah.
Well, that's really easy.
Yeah.
The suburban train line, the RER line, number C. It takes you from.
You mean letter C?
Yeah. Sorry. Letter. Yeah. Right. Letter C. The C train. All the trains in Paris that are the suburban lines, instead of having numbers, they have names. They have abbreviated names. This is a train you get on the left bank of the Seine River. You can get it at Saint-Michel. You can get it at the Eiffel Tower. You can get it at the Orsay stop. There are a series of stops along the left bank where you can get on this train. It costs €6.40 round trip.
Yeah, that's cheap.
It's about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And it gets you off 2 big blocks away from the Château.
Yeah.
It's really worth taking the train.
Oh, yeah. Don't park.
Don't try to park.
No, you will hate it. You'll pay a fortune for parking, and you're going to be walking more just to get back to your car.
Right.
It's like one of those Disneyland parking kind of situation where you're like 3 miles away from the entrance.
And you might not even get a parking space.
Yeah.
And you might have to park in a metered spot in town, which is even worse.
Oh, that's terrible, because then you have to go back every 2 hours to feed the meter.
And, of course, we all know that in France, you get a fine and you get towed pretty quickly.
Yeah. And then you're in competition with my cousin who lives in Versailles and complains about the parking.
Complains about the parking as a resident of Versailles.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he has his private parking at his home, but the
people park everywhere.
He's outside,
right.
There's people everywhere.
But the train is really very efficient, and they go all the time. You just have to make sure that when you get down onto the platform, that they list the destinations, the stops of the train that's coming up.
Yeah.
Just make sure that it says Versailles Chateau.
Okay.
Because there are actually 2 different things in Versailles, but you want the train. It's the last stop. It's really easy. Mm-hmm. Just make sure it's the train that says Versailles Chateau, and that's it. You get on, you get off. It goes back the other way. You can even get off at different stops on the way back.
Dozens and dozens of trains. There's probably trains like every 10 minutes.
About every 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay.
About every 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, and you'll see, you get off the train and you won't be alone.
Yeah. Are these the big double-decker trains? Yeah.
These are the big double-decker suburban trains.
Yeah.
So it's really, really, really easy to do it that way. Just be sure to wear comfortable shoes. These are cobblestone streets. The courtyard, which is enormous, which leads you up to the entranceway into the chateau, which is fabulous because you get this view from down below. It's on a slight incline of a hill as you turn the corner, and you see this humongous thing with this grill work that's all covered with gold, and then you see the gold on top of part of the chateau. But it's all cobblestones, and it's really, really hard on your feet if you don't wear comfortable shoes.
It's probably pretty difficult with a wheelchair, too.
It's difficult with a wheelchair. There is a central little space that is a basic sidewalk.
Oh, okay.
But other than that, since there are so many thousands of people that come and go all the time, you have to be careful.
Yeah.
And then, of course, once you're in the chateau, the grounds itself are not cobblestone, so it's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, Versailles Park is a park where you can sit on the grass, so you don't have to worry about being chased around and being told you have to sit on a bench.
Well, it's good. You can bring your picnic. You can bring your bikes. You can,
You can do all of that.
Yeah.
Just know that if you're going to obviously bring a backpack with a picnic, if you're going to go into the chateau, you will have to put that in a locker space because they don't want you going into the chateau. First of all, if you have a backpack, obviously, considering how crowded it is, you cannot do that. And they don't particularly want people going into the chateau with food. You can bring a bottle of water. I've always gone in with a bottle of water and usually some cookies or something like that. They don't bother you. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
As long as you don't have some kind of big backpack, in which case then it becomes another kind of a problem.
Yeah. Photography, is it allowed in the chateau?
Photography,
Remember?
no flash. No photography in the rooms, photography in the park.
Yeah.
Photography in the park.
Yeah.
But Versailles is
an experience. But they do have lockers. Like if you show up with an expensive camera, they will rent you a locker.
Now that's a good question. They don't usually like you to put expensive cameras. No, you wear it around your neck. You just don't take pictures. And they don't want you putting cameras in the lockers because it becomes their liability, and they don't want that. However, the guards are very, very, very observant. And you really cannot take pictures inside.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a little hesitant to say no pictures at all or pictures without flash. There are certain rooms it
depends on where you are.
Where you can take some pictures without a flash.
Yeah.
But they'll tell you when you go inside. But my suggestion is if you have a very visible camera, keep it around your neck anyway. Which reminds me of one last thing, which I don't usually talk about, but you have to be careful about pickpockets. This is a very crowded space. Obviously, you go in with the idea that you're going there to have a good time and see beautiful things, but you
never know.
You just better be careful.
Yeah,
this is the perfect place for people with a certain kind of
bad intentions.
And bad intentions. They can all they have to do is be nicely dressed, get the audio phone just like you. If you have people pushing up behind you and people on your side, you might not even feel it if they go for it. So keep your bags closed under your arm and don't have anything visible that can be taken out of a pocket.
Yeah.
But not to end on the note of that, I would like just to say that Versailles is splendid. That's the word I would like to use.
Do you think it's worth taking the time to, if you're in Paris for a week, for instance?
If you're in Paris for a week, you go to Versailles.
You do?
Absolutely. If you're in Paris for 2 days, I would say no.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's not, you can't go for less than a half a day.
Yeah.
But it's a question of priorities. But basically, a week, yes, you take at least, you can take a half a day, you can take 3/4 of a day, because you can take the train back and get off at the Eiffel Tower. And that is your perfect day.
Yeah. So you'd go like sleep in the morning, arrive at Versailles around 1. Start with visiting the chateau.
Start with visiting the chateau,
and then
take
grounds.
Then you decide how much time you want to spend on the grounds. And assuming we're talking about a time of the year when the days are long, and there's light up into, let's say, 7:30, 8 at least at night.
Yeah,
you have the
which
time.
In France, I mean, it'll be daylight until 10 p.m., 10:30 p.m. in the summer.
In June and July, for sure.
Yeah.
And then you can take a train back and you can get off and visit the Eiffel Tower.
That sounds really good.
Sounds like a good day.
Sounds like a wonderful day. A bit tiring, but a good day.
Oh, but you're supposed to be tired when you're a tourist.
That's true. That's true. Well, we've broken 1 hour. This show is going to be our longest show ever, but it was well worth it. You know, we have to decide. Do we cut it up in small pieces, or do we give you the full, you know,
The full treatment.
Yeah, and I think it's better to not cut it up. But maybe you could give us some feedback about that. Go to the website and let us know if you would prefer shorter episodes or if the length of the episode is irrelevant. Because, you know, you're probably listening in your car and you can probably on your commute or however way you want to do this, and you can pause it. I mean,
yeah,
it's
you
a
can pause
podcast.
it. You can't pause me, but you can pause it. You know,
nobody can pause.
nobody can pause me. Yeah, but really, if you would like us to be a little bit shorter, a little bit more structured, do let us know.
Yeah. Although I like the structure just fine as it is. And another thing I love is iTunes reviews and reviews in Stitcher Radio. And please go do that. And we love you for it. And we're looking forward to talking to you again next Saturday.
Next Saturday.
Yep. Thank you very much. Et au revoir.
Au revoir.